Hi, welcome to this presentation on dominant impression. Dominant impression is a topic that you will explore in this presentation and then apply to your significant place essay. To get started, you've been looking hopefully through the content this week about description, and you've seen lots of different ways to kind of incorporate description into your paper. And just as a quick reminder, description is going to require you, the writer, to gather details. And in this case, you're gathering details for your specific place. One thing I want to mention very quickly is that we want to make sure, or you want to make sure, that you rely not only on the sense of sight in your descriptions, but also on the other senses as well. So as you're looking at your place and you're observing your place, don't forget about those other senses like sound, taste, touch, and smell, because sight is the one we go to predominantly, and so you want to make sure that you're looking at those other ones as well. And then with that idea of gathering details, as you're sitting in your place and you're taking in all of those details, hopefully you'll select those that are going to create one single dominant impression. Now you might ask, what is a dominant impression? And dominant impression is the single quality, mood, or atmosphere that the author wishes to emphasize. So if you think about that, there's multiple examples. If you've ever been, I used to teach in a junior high, high school, and walking down to the junior high band room, there was only one word to describe that place, and it was loud. You couldn't help but hear them when you were coming down the hall. And so if that were my dominant impression, if that was the place I was going to describe, I would try to gather the details that would help me to describe that place as being one that's loud and kind of chaotic. So I might, pull those details about, the cacophony of different sounds that I'm hearing, the trumpet, the trombone, someone's banging on the drums. I'm going to give little snapshots, and through those snapshots, the reader should be able to figure out that this place is loud. If I'm wanting to play up the idea of the chaos, maybe I'm going to talk about, the kid who's throwing and tossing his drumsticks up in the air. I'm going to talk about the one who's the 8th grade boy who's tapping the other one on the shoulder and pushing, this idea of chaos. I'm going to try to build that up through these little snapshots. And so that's going to create this dominant impression. And so as you're thinking about your own place, hopefully you're thinking about what mood or what feeling do I get when I come here? Is it a feeling of peace and tranquility? Is it a place of, like I mentioned before, chaos? Maybe it's a messy place. What kind of a feeling do I want my reader to have after they've finished reading this piece? That's kind of what a dominant impression is. And what follows are a couple of examples. And so on the next slide, you're going to see a description of place. And what I want you to do as you're reading this, I want you to think about, is this a positive or negative dominant impression? So start with that first, and then we'll try to pinpoint it to just one word. So read this. Is this a positive dominant impression, or is it a negative dominant impression? So what are you left with when you are finished reading? Something positive, something negative. All right, so after having read this, I'm not sure that any of us would line up and raise our hands and say, hey, let me go stay at that place. Let me go to grandma's house. This is a negative dominant impression. And the way that it's created is through the author's use of words. We see words like bleak, shabby, utilitarian, more office than bedroom, more attic than office. And so we're getting these words that have a very negative connotation. We don't want things to be described as bleak or shabby. Here it says even we were put to sleep. So a different kind of word use that leads us to believe that this isn't a very positive place. Down here it mentions this room without pride. Adjectives like cast off, shadeless, piles of cardboard boxes that might someday come in handy. So kind of this idea that there's some extra stuff in there that's not really necessary. There's bare floorboards, ruthless. So the word choice that's used, as well as the images. So here we have thin white spreads, naked blinds at the windows, orphaned condition. And so again, it's basically through the use of our word choice, but also through the choice of images that are created that lead us to believe that this isn't a very positive place. Now, positive and negative is kind of the start of dominant impression, and we can definitely say that this is a negative dominant impression, but can we put it even more specific? Can we get to a more specific dominant impression than just negative? Well, we know that we can take off happy and welcoming because those are two words that are not negative. Okay, so we're going to look at the last two. We have unwelcoming and we have messy, or we have a mess. And unwelcoming probably fits the best because while it is a mess, that's not the point of this. The point of that author writing that was to show how unwelcome and how unwelcoming it was for her and probably her siblings. So that's one example. This is a much shorter example, and it is a description of a person. And again, I want you to go first very generally. Is this positive or is this negative? What feeling do you get when you get to the end? And then we'll try to put it into more specific words in the next slide. Hopefully you understand and see that this is a very different dominant impression from the first one. This is much more positive. And the way that this person is being described, he has white gloves, so we get kind of an impression, who wears white gloves, or why would you wear white gloves? A maroon sport coat, brass buttons, gray slacks. So hopefully maybe you're even starting to picture this person. Silver framed bifocals, match the whistle. He has a slightly wrinkled face, polished black shoes, glossy. He's not fat. And we have neatly conceals. So again, more positive words in this one. And so when you're creating this positive connotation or this positive dominant impression, we pick words that are more positive. Now I do want you to notice, someone might say that wrinkled is a negative word or a negative image, meaning old perhaps. But in this case, they don't use just wrinkled, they use slightly wrinkled. So they make it a little more positive by just inserting an adjective in front of there that says, well, it's not really wrinkled, it's just slightly wrinkled. The same thing is true down at the bottom. So he's maybe not as slender and trim as some 20-something, but he's also not fat. And so how they say that, it might be a negative, perhaps. And so what they say instead is that he conceals a small, round pot belly. So kind of a more positive way, a positive spin on something that could be considered more negative. Okay, so that's our description of Fleming. And so let's look and see if we can get it a little more specific. So what impression do you get of this character after reading the passage? Well, he's definitely not sloppy. He's definitely not unfriendly. There's no words that would help us to get to that conclusion. Could be distinguished or could be neat. I would say that either one of those would work, depending on what follows in the rest of the paragraphs. If it's all about how he's very neat, then that would probably be a good dominant impression. If it's about how he's distinguished, there were clues that led us to believe that as well. The fact that he's wearing the white gloves and he's got the coat on. We'd probably need a little bit more information to kind of distinguish between the two of them. But he's definitely not sloppy, definitely not unfriendly. So what does this have to do with your essay anyway? You must have a dominant impression. When I get to the end of your 4 pages or longer, I want to have a word that I could attach. Now, positive and negative is kind of the start, but if you can get more specific, that would be the best. So if you want to create a dominant impression of relaxation, you're going to pick those details from your place that help us to see this place as a relaxing place or a place where you go for relaxation. If it's a high stress, maybe you're in the ER or you're in a waiting room and you want to create this high stress situation, you're going to choose the things in that room, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, touches, and smells that are going to create this impression of it being high stress. So hopefully that makes sense. You're going to try to pinpoint a word to your place and then kind of create that feeling throughout the whole piece. And again, you do that through your word choice and also by the images that you choose. So using adjectives and adverbs that fit that impression is a good thing. Using images that fit that dominant impression is also a good piece of advice. This dominant impression will become the focus. So it's the feeling that your reader should come away with after reading the essay. And what some people do is they put that at the top of their paper. It's their focus. Everything that I do in this paper must work to this one dominant impression, this one focus. And so if you put that at the forefront of your paper, sometimes that helps you to kind of focus. The dominant impression will be mentioned in your thesis statement in your introduction. And also in that thesis statement or in that intro, you'll want to mention the place that you're describing. And some things to get you started. Begin by distinguishing if the impression will be positive or negative, so start very generally first, and then get more specific, and then fit your details to that particular word. So in this case, pre-writing becomes kind of important. If you have a list of words, taking a look at those words to see, what kind of an impression are they already creating, and then how can I change those outliers to fit that dominant impression. I wish you good luck, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call or to email. Have a great day.